I have an odd little story to tell from my childhood that is not important, at least the story itself, but for some reason it's stuck in my mind for, close to 30 years, and I guess it might be the first conscious realization that I had of having an ability to manipulate some people if I wanted to. So, I think I was about 10 or 11, and I was at church camp. I had to go every summer. It wasn't an option. It was in this little bitty town about an hour and a half north of here, I think. And this was a UPC church camp, and there were maybe a couple of things that I liked about church camp, but for the most part I absolutely hated going, because it was like you were being watched 24/7, scrutinized 24/7, even more so than normal, because you've got an adult or two in the room with you. You've got parents, relatives, your pastor, who was also my relative, coming up for the nightly services, and you're scrutinized to make sure that you're, on fire, full of the Spirit, not lukewarm or whatever. You always are supposed to be on fire. And so it was a lot of pressure, nerve-wracking. Plus, I just, I wasn't that social of a person. I didn't like being forced to be around all these people all the time, and especially ones that I didn't know. And then especially, the fact that my sociopathic cousin, the one that's 8 months younger than me, who tormented me so much, this is just a 5-day stretch of being able to torment me non-stop, basically. And in so many ways, she was my polar opposite in some ways. She was an extrovert to my introvert. And then, of course, they had money and we didn't. So, she had nice clothes and everything. She was thin. I was chubby. Her dad was a preacher, which automatically made her sort of UPC royalty. And, of course, I had none of that. I was just a preacher's niece. That doesn't count for anything. Well, anyway, long story, or I'll get more to the point here. During the day, we had classes that we had to go to that were broken down by age and gender, I believe. Yeah, I'm pretty sure. I can't remember that absolutely for sure. But anyway, so now bear in mind that in a female especially, intelligence was not an attribute that held much value. Things that held value were you pretty, thin, possibly, depending on who it was, possibly, how intensely religious were you? Cooking, that would be important. That'd be very important. Good cooking ability. Basically, the willingness to have a bunch of kids, get married early, young. So the reason I'm telling you that is because my intelligence stood out even more in UPC gatherings than it did at school, because, and I'm not trying to say that these people are dumb by any means. I just mean, since it wasn't a prized attribute, even if somebody else was extremely intelligent, they might just not show it as much because it really was nothing to brag about, And so in this class, one day the teacher assigned my cousin the task of writing up the menu at the cafeteria type thing for the next day in some kind of creative way. Okay. Well, my cousin was, had no conception whatsoever of how to write in do any kind of creative writing. She was a very canny person, but not intelligent. And I was very good at writing, like outstanding at writing, even in school. So she asked me for my help, and I knew that I could do the simplest kind of thing, and it would blow everyone's, or it would be good enough, and probably blow everyone's mind if I really tried on something. So I sent her to go get the menu, and when she brought it back, I sat there and I used a very simple tool, alliteration, to name these different food items. And she thought it was the greatest thing ever. My cousin thought it was the greatest thing ever because she had no conception, like I said, of how to write anything at all. And when she took it in the next day, the teacher was completely blown away by this very simple concept, but just not something people are used to seeing. Some actual creative writing there in the church. So she makes a huge deal out of it, and my cousin, I see the vulnerable spot there, because she's never had this kind of praise before, and she has her head down smiling, and I can tell that she's like kind of glowing over it, and some part of me, not consciously, just, I didn't think this through, but when we got back to our rooms after class, she was still glowing and smiling and talking about it, and then she's like, of course it was you, and I was like, no, that was all you, you went and got the menu, you helped me, blah, 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 blah. Even though it wasn't her. It was all me. She did go get the menu. I did everything else. She had no input at all. But I kept talking to her and telling her it was all her until I saw the switch flip where she was willing to delude herself and believe that what I said was true, and it just snapped that into place in her mind. And I just sat back and watched the results. It was an experiment for me, apparently. And made me realize that I did have an ability to manipulate at least some types of personalities. And that was it. I don't recall having any thoughts after that at all of using that ability to my own advantage. It was just kind of a clinical thing, like I was a scientist and I performed this chemical experiment and A plus B produced C, and I was like, and wrote it down in my little mental notebook and went on. But I told this story once to my boyfriend at the time and asked him what he thought about it, because I was curious, because I really I know that it's odd, and I wanted an outsider's perspective, especially someone intelligent and intuitive, and he definitely was. And his response was something to do with me being surprisingly detached from myself. And it is true, at least when the logical side of my brain is in control. I can take a step back and look at myself and my actions from a logical, detached perspective, just kind of going, you know, and trying to figure out cause and effect. And of course that's, you know, why I'm doing, or one of the main reasons that I'm doing this video series, is that I'm trying to document the causes, or at least events and things that led up to my current situation in life. So, but on the other hand, I get very, sometimes I step too far back and start wondering about I tend to get hung up on some kind of loathing that I have towards the idea of being delusional. You know, like, I'm trying to think of a good example from maybe pop culture, but, you know, basically, I mean, you've seen it in pop culture, TV shows, movies, whatever, where a person is just not self-aware, you know, and they think they're one thing and everybody around them knows that they're not. They're actually this other thing, and probably that character at some point does have a self-realization moment, and it changes his life and whatever, blah, blah, blah. Well, for some reason, I have just, I'm just about, or I just can't handle the thought of being delusional, so I question myself all the time and think, is this what everybody else realizes and I don't realize it? And am I not being self-aware? So then it's like I'm too self-aware, and it makes me, it eats away at my self-confidence, and it is just a constant source of angst. So, anyway, we'll come back to manipulation at some point, because there have been times as an adult that I did eventually use that ability, and not always with good results.